You are now watching the whimsically works of ArchWizard CJ. If you enjoy, be sure to like and subscribe.
The Wu-Lin faction are a roster of lazily designed characters that we all got excited for, only to find out their best features are 400 millisecond lights, honestly, if any of us had known these characters would be just fucking dry and boring when they were first announced, I would have just asked Ubisoft to make more heroes for their already existing factions. The Wu-Lin characters are dry, uninteresting, linear, and literally all of them except Shaolin feel like afterthoughts. Speaking of afterthoughts, it's very obvious that console is an afterthought because these characters are so wildly unbalanced for console play. Wu-Lin duels and brawls literally feel like I'm playing rock, paper, scissors with an amputee. It's basically a contest of lights, most unreactable because your opponent has 120 ping, spamming palm strike with Tiandi, or the indicator for half of his attacks show up either way too early or way too late for you to adequately react to whatever the fuck is going on because of glitched out animations. I'm looking at you, Kenzo. Shaolin is easily the most well-designed character out of the four, and ironically enough, he's probably just A tier in terms of duels and ganks. The rest of the characters feel like Stefan pulled out a crusty dick cheese smelling leatherback journal with all of his failed Warden, Shigoki, and Peacekeeper concepts and said to himself, what if we made them Chinese? By fucking far, the most poorly designed character of the bunch is most definitely Nuxia. She is literally season 1 Peacekeeper with 400 millisecond light chains and a built-in auto parry. And despite that description, she is still somehow fucking trash. Zhang Zheng feels like I'm fighting a fucking indicator more than a character because believe it or not, Ubisoft Montreal changed the speed of his lights from 600 milliseconds to 500 milliseconds, but forgot to change the animation, which is why his attacks land when they visibly look like they shouldn't. And despite Shaolin being the best designed character by a moderate margin, all four of them literally are potatoes because if you basically play like a lawbringer, none of them have the tools to efficiently open up opponents as consistently as someone like Warden or Kensei or Conk, which is why it pisses me off when people say dumb shit about how the Wu-Lin make the original roster obsolete when they actually do very little to shift the balance of the already established top tiers. Aesthetically, the Wu-Lin bore me as well, like the Knights, the Vikings, and the Samurai have such a grounded aesthetic that feels inspired and unique in reference to who they represent. There's plenty of examples in-game from hero characters to the mobs and Dominion to the maps themselves, just how inspired a lot of Faraam's atmosphere truly is from these elements. And then you have the Wu-Lin who fucking literally feels stapled on. They have no presence on the map, you can't choose them as a faction, they have no unique faction minions, they're just off to the right like some fucking weird Smash Bros secret characters. I feel like these characters, aside from being boring in their conception, materialize the issues I have with For Honor's conception as a whole. And an overpriced $30 DLC which brings less content with such a bloated and exaggerated cost than I've received with cheaper expansions in the past to do more than give so little. A thing about these characters that highlights the agony I personally suffer from the development team and this game is the conceptualization of things versus the execution. The ideas the staff, development team, whoever present to us as an intentional add-on to the already existing game sound phenomenal in terms of potential. This is what generates the hype. Well, that and grossly over-exaggerating trailers that lead you to believe something epic is coming when really it's just However, in the fashion of a lot of, I'm gonna say it, incompetent development teams, that theory crafting of potential excellence meets a very abrupt and jarring intersection with the all too undermining and underwhelming reality of what's representing an idea into our tangible existence. That was way too fucking complicated. Basically, potential is not equivocal to prowess shown. If we base anything or everything off potential, then everything is excusable because we've not only extended past probability into possibility, but more so, the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. We should instead judge in the now because the now is what's here. Judging everything off potential means Hitler did nothing wrong and every failed test should allow a student to pass because they had the potential to be an A. For Honor conceptually could have gone anywhere, and very realistic outcomes could have been magnificent in their conception because For Honor as an idea had a very high probability of being something unique and refreshing. However, that just plainly isn't the case with what we got. People for such a long time in this community had these absurd thoughts of grandeur and were biasly defending this IP despite its initial launch failure, a horrible game state that lasted well into the game's developmental cycle after release, negative press surrounding blunders that could have been avoided with proper educational resources, or just a PR team in general, and a development team that operates like it's the fucking Church of Night with about as much transparency as Flint, Michigan tap water. What makes me so irritated about a lot of the arguments made in that regard in this community, from characters to the game itself, is that they're emotional arguments people toss up in chronic fits to justify their allegiance with what they know is a shit game they've invested way too much of whatever it is they've invested in it. And there's always an irony in taking that route, because instead of simply acknowledging that these problems exist, making it abundantly so the devs or whoever can address the actual problems, this community diverges itself into fractures so small no one conclusion can be made as to how to fix the game, consequently making it impossible to accurately assess actual issues that need to be addressed. In fact, that's something in itself. These 4 new characters do nothing to shake up the meta. They just add more grief for casual players who've yet to understand the original 9, let alone the pre-Marching Fire 12. These 4 new characters contribute about as much to the death of this game as benign tumors. They at best are just another obstacle to consider when fighting, and at worst spam happy, easy to learn, lazy designs that first force console players to play guess which 400 millisecond directional light is slapping your naked guard. Even then, that can only go so far. There's no ominous threat they present, there's no foretold scripture on how Nuxia is the death of this game. This is the 4th group of DLC characters quoted as being the death of this game, and it's only the 4th DLC. Shut the fuck up. The Wu-Lin are such a disappointment to me, but they in essence capture exactly what I feel about For Honor. An interesting concept is lazily executed, bloated way out of proportion by inaccurate and emotional depictions of what actually is by people both observing and participating. And it makes me kind of sad. The game itself has flaws, but I really feel like it's all the elements surrounding it that make it such a sad case. For Honor is year 2 into its developmental cycle, not as a game, but as an IP in general. It had a starting roster of 9. People compare it to fighting games like Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter, and even though I still refuse to say For Honor is a fighter because it can't even decide if it wants to be a 1v1 or team-based experience with 2 wildly different metas and systems of conduct, my biggest thing is, why are people putting so much on For Honor? You realize this game is only 2 years old, right? Criticize it, yeah. Challenge the developers, yeah. Because so many things outside the game's core gameplay have been such a prevalent issue. Inconsistent connectivity, cheesing, game-breaking bugs, a shitty in-game NTX economy, lack of developer transparency, etc. have been necessary critiques, absolutely. But in terms of core gameplay, why is everyone so fucking desperate for Honor to hurry up and be the next big thing? It is literally a Gen 1, the first of its kind, and people are upset it's not competitive and polished. People have the audacity to call the game comp when it's not, and other people call the game a mess like that's an inherently bad thing. What pisses me off about that notion isn't just about how debilitating it is in terms of the game's potential growth, but it's the fact that people already have these expectations from an IP that has only been an IP for a year plus. I'm not giving justification to its failures or a scapegoat for any fundamental inconsistencies that should have been avoided to begin with. I'm also not forgiving the fact that this game, like many others, is a consequence of expectation versus reality, while it was a different game entirely during its conceptual stage and early gameplay. But at the core, what For Honor is, to expect so much out of such a young IP is just hubris. I'm not saying that we should forgive all that has happened. In fact, I want to say the opposite. But the biggest flaw in this community has and continues to be with this game, something I feel stems as a general issue with gaming this generation, is personified in this game especially in 2 words: themselves. Instantaneous gratification. The biggest issue I've seen this game suffer, bar none, from both developer and consumer alike, is the hastening of its developmental cycle in a desperate attempt to either catch up, copy, or mimic other games, or otherwise pretend to be a more established game than it already is. For Honor does a lot of things really well. However, it does many more things poorly to the point of inhibiting both my and many others' desire to play, let alone consistently. Most of us just do it to maintain relevance as we grow, but to keep it real, what made For Honor fun in the first place was the idea of this medieval combat simulator giving us a fresh spin on brawler combat and allowing individual players to really test their prowess in what was considered a technical and slower paced combat experience. The problem is, the game in actuality is very linear and unforgivingly so, making it a trudge to play once you have cognitive understanding of the mechanics, as there's literally a handful in the game with no variable combat to diversify encounters past timings and hard reads of other opponents. The developers knew this, as do we as consumers. However, it didn't stop them from trying to facade the hero series in an attempt to make For Honor this competitive gauntlet of well mixed and balanced characters, when in actuality it was, and in my opinion still is, an unbalanced game that supports casual to intermediate play and maxes out its competitive viability at pseudo high level, maintaining a certain level of fun. The game wasn't built for esports, and that's okay. However, the developers still push for an E-League, and us as players, feeding an ego and wanting to feel more important than what we are, ran with the idea of this game actually being comp, and forced ourselves into a hole where all the current occupants are trying to balance this game around what they feel are comp changes, when a lot of the people are demanding said changes with no fundamental understanding of the game beyond an intermediate standpoint. This lack of understanding universally led to one of the lowest points of For Honor's timeline, easily the 10K tournament, which to this day is a universal reference point to the accelerated boost of For Honor's collapse, ironically so. It's sad because we all keep dictating changes and demanding the game goes a potentially limitless numbers of directions that fractal into this conjoining belief of competitive balance when we don't even have the most basic concepts understood to this day because of a lack of educational resources on Ubisoft's behalf. And that brings me to my next point. People are demanding so much from a game they don't even understand, causing mass confusion and degradation of a focused narrative for fixing the game. And this is so prominently shown in our perception of one of the most basic concepts in the game, 400 millisecond light.